Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome back, dear listeners, to yet another captivating episode of the Grid Mod Pod, your trusty companion in the world of grid modernization. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Cook, and it's always a pleasure to be your host.
And I'm your co-host, Brett Ryhal. It's a pleasure to be back, Liz. We always seem to have a good discussion today, so it's a pleasure having me back again. Thank you.
Indeed, Brett. And it's really, for me, all about educating and creating the content to engage our industry peers, as well as those that are very interested in the power grid. So I think today I would love to talk about and really unravel the intricacies of what does our future utility workers look like?
That's a pretty broad landscape, right? That has a lot of depth to it. And as the utility world and the engineering industry in itself shifts, what skill sets and training do you think, this has been kind of on my mind, but so what skill sets and training do you think will be crucial for the next generation of the workers, not just the engineers, but the linemen, the techs, that you think are going to help navigate the electrification transition successfully? Where do you see that at?
Yeah, I think it's one of my favorite topics because I think when we think power grid, electrical engineers, but what it really takes to keep the lights on 24/7, 365 over the last really 100 years was not just the electrical engineers and those that were kind of designing and building and planning it. It was really, of course, our line workers, our field workers, those in the field, constructing and enabling really the assets that really bring our electrons from the bulk generation system down to the customer edge. And so there's lots of assets in there, and you really need that expertise of the field workers, as well as those that kind of understood the phenomena of electricity to ensure the safety and the protection of those workers. And then as the grid built out to be the largest machine in the world, it was really the similar phenomena. We standardized on certain design philosophies, how to protect, control, and really keep the electron flow contained. And so, that was a really exciting space to be, especially when the grid was being built out and there was a significant amount of work, and it was just kind of an ever-growing industry. And really over the last 40 years, maybe even 50, the utility space built this really large grid to facilitate our energy usage that we all became proud of and used quite often. And we really allowed the innovation and really the design and kind of R&D to leave the utility space because we had the assets that ran the grid the way we understood. So when we think of where we are today, the assets in the field are, you can think of the muscles, right? When you think of, I love to relate everything to the being. And over time, we developed the communication network to really communicate to the muscles from like the neural networks or, your fiber, Wi-Fi, to be able to talk to those assets. And then really in the 70s and 80s, when we developed computers, we can start controlling those muscles or those assets from our control rooms. So right there in that space, we started having a need for IT employees, telecom, as well as the electrical, mechanical, and, all the engineers associated for designing. And now with everything happening, I think we have to open up that playbook and realize not only do we need the utility effort in regards to like keeping the grid prepared and designed, but we need to look at what's happening at that edge. So one of my favorite topics is a lot of you avid listeners, distributed energy resources. So on top of our telecommunication, our electrical engineers, our line workers, our electrical technicians, we now really need to think about, the charging station, the solar installers, the new generation that's being developed and innovated, and how that coordinates. And then when you start tying all of that in, you really need to understand your cybersecurity. You need to have a really depth knowledge of the architecture of all of your IT systems to really talk to each other at a much grander scale. And then lastly, we can't forget about something else that's happening in the grid, not just electric vehicles and distributed energy resources in the realm of generation, but is electric heating and cooling. So the electricians and really the HVAC technicians that are kind of rolling out all that new technology. So there's just a really broad knowledge base. And I think as an industry, we should be thinking of the whole scale of that. And so how do we create the programs and really drive the awareness of this really large growing workforce that is required, but also super exciting because we're transforming the grid as we know it. So
Yeah, and you've noticed it's no longer you have civil engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, and linemen, journeymen, right? And technicians out in the field. It's computer science now. It is programmers. And we used to kind of treat that, right, as the very fringe of utility in the power utility engineering world, right? And now it's starting to become, hey, we need 4 or 5 computer science gurus who know how to build these servers. So it has expanded. How can we train our, we talked about a little bit about having each one of these little parts, everybody's little part to think a little bit outside of their box. The electrical engineer thinking outside their box, their civil, the lineman. How can we train individuals, and this is going to kind of lead into one of my other questions I had for you is, how can we train individuals, to foster that culture, to kind of get that innovation as part of the core culture for everybody?
yeah, and I think, it's becoming a passion of mine as well, is because it will start at a really young age, right? So one, really educating not only high school, but even before high school, and letting the next generation workforce to just be in on what's happening. So like for me, I came out with my 4-year degree in electrical engineering, and I didn't even think of the power grid, not once, right? Except there was like one power system analysis course, and it was almost intangible of the theory and the phenomena of the equations that I was solving and how that tied to the fact that I used energy 24/7, 365. And so somehow bringing the education, the curriculum, and just the general awareness of how we use energy and the phenomena that has to occur to allow that to happen. So, and that should start at a very young age of really creating the excitement around energy use. And that takes right into really the high school age. And then of course, college years or after high school is really giving or having platforms that are easily accessible to teach like where we've come from, where we are today, and where we go in digestible manners so that people can really get excited about the industry. I mean, I think it was easy to get involved in the industry when no one even knew what a light bulb was, right? And then it became a very generational trade. Like, the father, the grandfather, the great grandfather worked in that industry. But outside of that, it was really hard to really entice really my and your generation of engineers to come into the utility space because of that laggard, driving out the innovation. So I think it starts at a really young age. And I think because it's so diverse, all talent, all capabilities are really, know-how is available to really all ages, as well as, all types of learning, from using your hands all the way to being very analytical. And I actually did forget about my favorite thing about where we're headed in the utility space is our data analytics, right? So empowering and onboarding data scientists and those that can really start to pull the data in and understand the architecture of the data, and then start driving out, use cases that utilities can use, as well as external stakeholders, to really empower us to keep, improving and modernize the grid.
That's part of the goal, is to get people to think a little bit outside of what they're naturally comfortable with and expand that mindset into being a global thinker from all aspects and all dynamics of that integration. You brought up data analytics. I remember one of the first times I tried working on a server system with hundreds of terabytes, and I was building it privately, and I get into it. I'm like, okay, great, I built it. And I didn't think about bandwidth at all, about how to transfer this between, right? And I was thinking inside my box and not a little bit one or two rings outside, and ran into a great troubleshooting nightmare of how to build out the data transfer for these massive sets of data. And I think as more individuals, all the way from the technician that's installing these and testing and implementing the relay dynamics, all the way to the engineers, having them think about it from that holistic perspective, I think will resolve a lot of those error traps we run into. Something we were talking about is, you are a doctor, PhD. What roles do you see academics and some of these partnerships, industry partnerships that we have? They're popping up left and right. How do you see those playing in creating the future ready workforce in this industry?
Yeah, so, my path to where I am with my doctorate was, kind of unique in the fact that I continued my education while working full time. But, the reason for that was really having a very inspirational and amazing first boss who really was a coach. And I truly believe, successful leaders are great coaches. The ones that really see the potential in someone and then work to unlock their potential personally. So, one of the early on, aspects of my career as well as my educational path was really allowing those around me to open doors that I didn't know existed, and then allowing me to feel safe as I walk through them. And so what does that mean? That, like, from an electrical engineering perspective, when I came into the door, I only knew what my 4-year degree, taught me. And one thing I would love to change is, like, from the university perspective, is creating that adjunct path where you're really bringing in industry and tying it to what we're studying, instead of it being all theory, because I think that's quite powerful. Because what I learned in the first really 6 months of being in my career was probably more than some of those fundamental, classes that I took in the last 2-3 years of my curriculum. But all that to say is having someone, teach as well as coach, and then develop the awareness of the power of further education. And so the further I went with my educational route was really teaching me how to do hard things, and really, buckling down and creating the awareness to achieve a certain goal. And so that's the same thing that was happening throughout the career as well. So it's like a parallel path. And then what I thought was really surprising is, as I continue to study, is, I came upon data analytics with my doctoral work. So power system analyst, and then really starting to see, really in the last 5 years, how taking data, studying it, learning the patterns, learning the behaviors can be taken across all really industries. But the same tools of, like, the beautiful mathematics that we all use to, like, get us through engineering school ultimately unlock the potential for, data analytics to drive insights that we never had before. And so I think any type of educational path that one chooses is really having that perspective and having a great coach or mentor to continuously, I don't know if cheer is the right word, but, like, from the sidelines, give the guidance and really the awareness that as you do hard things and you complete your goals, doors that you've never known were possible start to open up to you. And that if you show up as your best self, like, you ultimately just are in continuous, like, mode of learning, and therefore, where you head, you never know. So I would love to kind of continue to share that with the generation of workforce, that I am empowering, in my role, but really taking that to the larger extent possible. So I don't know if I answered the full
You
question, but
you answered you answered actually a few questions there. You kind of tacked it down. It does seem like, especially, some of the things that we've been involved in and that we've had the opportunity to share some learning experiences with and discuss. Being in an environment, we were trained that there's one right answer for a test. I mean, there was even enough, even all showing all your work wasn't enough, it still wasn't enough, right? So there's only one answer. You have to show all your work. That's it. And we're heading into this industry where there is going to be failure. There is going to be risks associated with that. There are going to be projects that don't go exactly the way we want them to go. And the utility industry, including my industry, the private engineering industry, we're kind of risk adverse to that, because that's money, that's time. We have KPIs to hit on both sides
right.
of the fence. And training and mentoring individuals, having good mentors that train the newer generation of engineers, techs, et cetera, that there are going to be failures. That's okay. It's how we adapt and overcome those. So what mentorship and leadership programs do you see, you kind of touched on it, being implemented to ensure this knowledge transfer? We're learning. We are on the razor's edge of new technology. What mentorship programs or anything can you see as being beneficial to the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I think hitting upon, just, my positive experience in wanting to share, the impact that can have on one person is, we can have official mentorship programs, and I think they're incredibly valuable. It really, kind of like carves out the time and kind of gives you the door to walk in to be a mentor or a mentee. But really, having that ability to be a coach, right? So when you think, what is a mentor? I think it's having the capability to embrace someone and really you're there for the mentee per se. So it could be a very structured organization, or it could just be the luck of who you find, in your journeys. You never know who it may be, right? Like that's another thing I think is really important that we should, teach the next generation is, relationships matter. Networking and connecting with other beings matters because you never know what someone's words will do or what will trigger for you to do next. So like if you're around people and more often and creating those connections, you can start connecting dots more rapidly. But all that to be said, so a mentor is there to kind of listen and herd and really like train the next workforce like officially. But it also could be someone that really teaches you like the soft skills or the importance of keeping your agreements or like setting your self-imposed deadlines and really, sharing your own success stories so there's a tangible connection to it. Being there to listen while, the mentee may struggle. So like, I know that I've been involved running official programs where it's like you set up a reoccurring one-on-one meeting, you make time for that person, you kind of share an equal agreement that you show up for each other, one experienced, one not experienced, and you kind of grow that relationship in together. And I think for mentors, it's really cool to keep your eyes open or your heart open that you may create a connection that you never know will benefit you in a way, right? So it doesn't have to be this like up, down or power, hierarchy. It's really just creating a relationship that is teaching, educating, and really opening the eyes of the other. And I think we need to do more of that, right? Especially in the corporate culture, but especially in academia. You have your guidance counselor, sometimes your teaching hours, your office hours, you have, but like, what does that really mean to the individual student or the individual person? Like, we should talk more fluidly about, creating that openness at a safe space for one to ask questions, possibly be wrong, give them the opportunity to fail safely so they can pick themselves back up and keep on running. So I think, standing up structured programs are really important, but also just the general awareness of what it means to be a good leader in any industry, but let alone an electric utility industry, is being a great coach. And so another thing, since I'm here, is when you think about everyone that has retired and that we have this big gap, right? So just acknowledging, yes, there's a gap. Yes, knowledge has left. But something I've seen in my career is people can do really hard things if they're given the right empowerment and tools for training, education, and just general like correct vision. That younger workforce can really do powerful things, and not to limit them just because of the limited experience they may have.
Yeah, I think that's you're nailing it on the head there. That's very insightful because you do see those two paths, the formal training process, which you have to get done one way or the other. That way people know the SOPs, people know the qualifications they need to have in order to proceed, know their formal career path. But it's always been my case that I have found through as a mentee and a mentor in both situations, having that go-to person that you could really confide in, that it kind of stays like you said, in that safe space, this box where you can say, I don't really understand this. I know I probably should, but I don't really understand this. Or can you help me? Can you help teach me a little bit more? I don't want my boss to kind of know that I don't know this, but can you help me? Forms two things. One, it helps formulate somebody's understanding of the topic better, right? They're able to advance their understanding. And the second, that creates that community, right? That informal community inside of the utility or a private firm that I think not just the previous generation had with their coffee breaks and the donuts and the small talk by the water cooler, but the next generation needs that culture even more so they do have safe spaces that they can go to really enhance their learning and feel that sense of connection and community to the company that they're involved in. Have you found any sort of collaboration tools? We're in the digital era, right? Collaboration tools that have worked, some that haven't. Is it still go to the person's desk? What have you found
Yeah.
that's worked or not worked so far?
I mean, Teams, or what is it, that other, I don't know, some of the other tools that
We used
that
Skype for a while, I
people are
think,
using.
in the,
Yes.
the pandemic era.
And having, I guess, AMI to those that can relate to our generation, but having that instant communication, I think is a transformational change in how we communicate in large organizations. That chat box, email, some say is irrelevant, some say is really powerful to run a business. But yeah, you're right. Since we're into these hybrid organizations, or we have, people working across, countries, if not just states and cities, from an educational or like next workforce perspective, it's all about the soft skills, how to communicate effectively, understanding really the bigger picture while also driving, your individual task that's assigned to you. So I think that comes back to, again, successful leadership is having that coaching aspect is, every team is very uniquely different. Every person is very uniquely different. But what everyone should have is really like that North Star, that vision, right? Where you're kind of aligning your goals and your actions towards. And then, there is no perfect solution, I think, to figure out how to communicate across all different business groups. But one thing I think is happening in the utility space is because of this dynamic shift and change, the technology and the newness of everything that wants to really play on a system that has been pretty steady Eddie for the last 40, 50 years creates a lot of change, which nobody truly likes change. But the only way to really embrace change as a human is to feel as if you are being communicated well to, that you understand how it's going to impact you. You understand how the tool is going to actually make not only you efficient, but your teammate efficient. So you see like the bigger picture and how to create that content and that communication, I think creates a whole other realm of the utility industry that we need to focus on is good communication, and change management control. Because if you think about it from a transformational perspective, like kind of tying it back to grid mod and everything that's happening, is we're going from a system that was really ran with the muscles, and I kind of analogy back to the body. We're deploying and going to be actively deploying a significant amount more of field communications, right? How to actually talk to it. And then the back end, really kind of the computational systems of how all of your data and your system architecture, IT, will make everything work. So transformation is happening from the assets of the utility. One of the foundational performing asset will be is the IT, right? That in itself changes how utilities and the employees that are working within really will have to like think differently. And so like in regards to like best tools to use, I mean, since we're talking technology, is really just knowing massive amount of data can be created. How do we actively like streamline it, digest it, and present it to all various audiences? And sadly, like it seems like it's happening too quickly for us to keep our heads spinning. But I think if we like ground ourselves in that vision where we're going, which is having full situational awareness of all of our assets, so that we can connect all of this new technology while keeping lights on.
Yeah, and giving,
I don't know. I could talk all day. This stuff gets me
yeah,
excited.
and empowering the individual, right? We start,
Right, like not limiting,
right?
right?
It
Like,
has to be, hey,
yeah,
we have a problem. What's the solution? And anybody can Google a result, but having somebody that's empowered, that they just don't go find the first search engine result or the first newest thing in the industry, and giving them the little bit enough of a leash that they feel comfortable with exploring something. And we've had a couple good experiences with that, where they, hey, I got an idea, I researched this seems to work, other utilities are using it, what about this could help streamline it for us.
so see what I did. I focused on the communication tools, so I was really limited to how to communicate with each other. But what you're talking about is all the various tools out there that could unlock a lot of what we need to do. Okay, I got it. We could talk about that for like a whole.
We're still well on track. It's just, and I think we need to keep empowering the next generation to have that exploring mindset. What can we, and there seems to be at least from what I've seen, I'm not sure if you've seen it, there seems to be this gap between the previous generation that trained us, which did have those coffee talks, had a little bit more of corporate community, and there's this new generation that that wants to be challenged, that wants to be pushed to explore new technology. Then we have us. We're kind of sitting there right smack in the middle of that sandwich. And we have a lot of A-type personalities that think, hey, this is my job. I'm going to do my 9 to 5 and get out of it. How do we communicate with our cohort, with our coworkers? How do we challenge them to become better mentors to the next generation coming up? What can we do for them?
I feel like you're playing right into the purpose of this podcast. No. So I think number one is creating just the general awareness of where we've been, being able to like ground us in where we are, and then connecting those dots to where we want to go. And so there's all ways to do that. But I think, if we have the 9 to 5 job and you show up and you're doing, one task and that's what you're assigned, but you don't know how that provides value to another, I think limits one's desire to work the job. So a part of me, and I think, this is part of my journey, but when I was a power system engineering consultant, I gathered data, build models, ran studies, and I loved my job. And I didn't understand why I was growing a family and I always wanted to go work and did the consulting hours. I went on a journey to try to figure out what about the culture of the company that I worked for made me think that way. And so I realized it wasn't actually the company. It was the awareness after my, 2 or 3 years of reflecting, is we are always helping someone. We are always creating content or a deliverable and working towards presenting or giving a deliverable to help someone answer a question they couldn't, or they didn't have the resource, or they didn't have the time, etc. Whatever the reason. And you got that thank you, that give or take. So I think, what we can do as we're really embracing this transformational change within the utility space, because we've served a very predictable customer base to now this very dynamic customer base, it's changed, is tying that awareness that we are going to continue to keep the lights on, right? And we get to be a part of that 24/7, 365, provide energy to all of our communities, wherever you may work. And so your task or your assignment or what you get up on a Monday to do and finish on a Friday, you're creating value that helps another. And so if there's any way to continuously keep that dialogue, however small the team action is, if you can tie it to really helping others, it really creates this energy of feeling inspired to do great work that really matters. And I think having our industry talk about that more, not really the what, aka the technology, but really the why behind the what, and then the how and the who. So it's the people part. We're transforming the core of our businesses, and to transform the core, we're transforming the people that work within it. So
that's really all that I have for you today, Liz. I know it was a little bit of a lighter topic today, but I think it's one of the easiest topics that I think we graze over from probably the utility aspect and from the private entity side, that we do graze over it and just think, it's an ancillary, when really training and empowering our coworkers and the people that are working for us, and mentoring and bringing them up so that they have a purpose and they feel empowered to kind of enrich themselves. I think it's something we miss a lot in the industry, and it's something that could really benefit a lot of companies out there. So thanks for your time.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, and if anybody has a question, we've gotten a couple so far, pretty good ones. Feel free to challenge us, give us something that you want us to rabbit hole into, and we'll dig into it. So thanks so much for listening.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the GridMod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.